What's up, everybody? We are in Birmingham, Alabama, talking to Jeff Parmer today. I specifically want to ask Jeff about wholesaling in the state of Alabama. New law, I say new, it's been, I guess, in effect for about, what, a year and a half now?
Almost 2 years.
2 years. So take us through, just let's start there. What is the law in the state of Alabama in regards to wholesaling? And specifically, how does the Real Estate Commission define wholesaling?
Good questions. Thanks, by the way, for letting me speak a few minutes here today. So the current state of the wholesale law is that there was a bill passed through the Alabama legislature and signed into law in August of 2023 that kind of put some parameters around wholesaling in Alabama. It was kind of a first step, and there haven't been, to my knowledge, I know in the last legislative session, there were not any further attempts to do anything further with regard to wholesaling laws. But basically, the law was kind of two parts. One dealt with requirements of notice to be provided to sellers and end buyers in transactions that are wholesale transactions. And to help facilitate that, some of the title companies in Alabama put together an affidavit that basically, just discloses to the seller and the end buyer that is this wholesale transaction. And that document needs to be signed by the buyer, the end buyer, the seller, and the wholesaler, just so everybody's kind of all on the same page about what kind of transaction it is. And that was really an attempt, I think, to pull the veil back a little bit. So the public, going into a transaction, a consumer seller would know that it's a property that's being purchased for the purpose of being wholesaled to an end buyer. And then the second part of the act dealt with the recording of memorandums and agreements and so forth to cloud title after a property is put under contract. And it put some parameters around that and imposed some penalties if those things are recorded inappropriately, without basis, that sort of thing. And basically, it was to address the situation where some wholesalers were trying to tie a property up for long periods of time, some of them even years down the road, and could cloud the title for potentially a long period of time. And so the wholesaling law, the second part of it kind of attempted to address that a little bit. So.
How does that bill, that law, define? Does it define what wholesaling is?
There are some definitions in it. I don't have a copy of the act right here before me, but it goes through and kind of addresses some in definitional ways what wholesaling is. And again, in general terms, it's somebody who is routinely buying a property or putting a property under contract with the express intention of selling it to somebody else rather than, buying it themselves. So, yeah.
So I guess I think the biggest question I have right now, and specifically talking about Alabama, I do want to get your opinion on what's going on in some other states if you have an opinion. But specifically in regards to Alabama, when I first learned what wholesaling was, I learned that it was no different than any kind of consumer good. Like, you're going to buy something with the intent to resell it for a higher price. Okay. And I think the key word there was buy. You're going to buy it, whether you're going to use your own money, you're going to use someone else's money, or you're going to double close, whatever it might be, you're going to actually take title to it and then you're going to resell it.
Right.
I always consider that's wholesaling. And then there's like this separate bucket that's assigning a contract.
Right.
And that's people have kind of lumped that in with wholesaling. That's assigning. Do you feel like this, because we all know that laws are getting passed to try to protect the consumer. Right? That's the intent of the law. We got to protect the consumer. Was this law put in place because more of assignments or double closes and actually like true wholesaling, or was it just all of it's just kind of lumped together?
I think in the eyes of most folks, it's kind of all one bucket.
Okay.
It's a situation where somebody is coming to a seller with a contract to put a property under contract, but that person that's bringing the contract is not going to actually be the purchaser. Either potentially they are and then immediately resell it, or they're going to actually assign the contract. I think from the standpoint of the Alabama law anyway, it kind of lumped it all together into one bucket. Yeah.
So, I mean, it would almost like lead me down the road to ask the question, what would be the difference between someone who's flipping a house? If I'm going to buy it and I'm going to turn around and sell it a month or 2 or 3 later, after maybe I've fixed something up, maybe I haven't, maybe I'm wholetailing it, maybe I'm just buying it and putting it right back on the market.
Right.
What's the difference?
Well, I think the difference is, are you adding any value to it? I think that's one step. If you are double closing a property, obviously, same day, subsequent day, whatever, you're not doing anything to the property itself to change the character of it. So I think that is one way in which wholesale transactions are kind of differentiated from fix and flips, because at least there, most of those situations involve some degree of rehab work being done on the property between the time it's purchased and the time it's resold. And so, those don't really fit in the wholesaling law, because the wholesaler is actually buying the property with their own money or borrowed funds, and then renovating it and then reselling it and paying off their loan. So it's more like a, traditional, I guess, real estate closing.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And Jeff, I know you've been doing this a very long time.
Too long.
So can you take me back to do you remember when you did kind of your first wholesale closing? Do you remember this? Were you confused by it? Were you, when was that? Take me back
that was
to that
probably, how long we've been at this, Brian? Probably, that's been 15 at least years ago. And, I remember when it first started, there have always been people in the Birmingham area that buy properties to hold in their own portfolios and investors and all that. But then kind of overlaying into that was the influx of folks from out of state that were in larger markets, buying properties, putting them under contract, wholesaling them to somebody else using typically a social media platform. And I think a lot of this has proliferated because of, Facebook groups, Instagram, TikTok, all that sort of thing, which has, greatly opened the accessibility of, featuring contracts to be assigned or double closed, that sort of thing. So as far as a particular moment in time that I, from that long ago, I don't remember the very first one, but I do remember kind of the wave of when it started. And, part of it also was when some private equity and hedge funds came into Birmingham and were really trying to buy a lot of doors. And to do that, of course, they dealt with real estate agents and would deal with real estate agents, but the volume of properties that they needed and they were looking for kind of lent itself to wholesalers kind of bird dogging properties for them and that sort of thing. So that's really kind of the way I remember it starting. So
this is the reason I asked the question.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like there was maybe something legally with this, with wholesaling as kind of we know it today? Did you ever kind of feel like you need to check with people, you need to see if this is a real thing, like going back to the very first time? Did it seem suspicious to you at all?
Well, I think there was certainly a level of suspicion. It was outside the box of the typical real estate transaction. And I remember there were a lot of discussions with other title companies, real estate attorneys, title underwriters, about how were they comfortable with this? How, what kind of parameters are they going to put around it? What kind of documentation do they want to see in the file? But I think all of that kind of got pretty well worked through.
How so? Do you remember?
Just some, I think just the repetitiveness of the volume of transactions kind of made it a little bit more, I guess everybody got a little more accustomed to it. So.
How do you feel like it's changed from those beginning days to where we got to before the law was passed?
I think people became more accustomed to it, more familiar with it. I think the general public got a little better understanding of the fact that, somebody may, if they have, especially a distressed property, they may, be approached by somebody wanting to buy it, or if they indicate their interest in selling it, that there may be folks that come with the idea of buying it to fix it up or buying it to resell to somebody else. I just think it kind of got to be a lot more popular and a lot more knowledge about it then. As far as what led to the wholesaling law, that didn't kind of start in Alabama. That was a trend that was nationally going forward. Some of it was driven by real estate commissions that were, feeling encroached upon by wholesalers, and then also by situations where sellers felt that they had been taken advantage of by wholesalers. So I think that prompted that move in other states, and it kind of drifted over into Alabama a little bit. Alabama is still probably one of the less regulated states than some of the other states. But,
of the ones that have laws on the books,
right?
Sure. Alabama's law doesn't seem to be as strict or as maybe hindering.
It is not. And now there's some states that don't have one at all. But
a lot of states, right?
Yeah, there are. And, I don't have a listing of which states do and which ones don't. But I know that there are some states that have, taken a good bit more aggressive approach with it than Alabama has at this
Do you
point.
feel like it was warranted, what Alabama did and maybe what some of these other states are doing? Did you ever feel like it was getting to a tipping point where the general public needed more protections?
I do. I think the wholesaling law was a good thing for Alabama, because I think it does kind of put everybody on the same hold everybody to the same standard, because there were plenty of wholesalers out there that were being very transparent with their seller and saying up front, we're putting this under contract with the sole purpose of finding another buyer for this. It's in their documents, big bold letters, that sort of thing. But then there were some wholesalers I know that were, wanting to keep certain information from the seller, not being completely open and transparent. Right. And I think that I've always thought that the whole real estate industry, not just wholesaling, but buyers, sellers, functions a lot better if everybody is kind of all on the same page with regard to what's actually happening in this transaction.
I remember my very first wholesale deal, and I was scared to death that the seller was going to find out that I'm making this amount of money.
Right.
And for no reason. I shouldn't have been. If I would, and I later became way more transparent, because they know I'm in the business to make a profit.
Right.
They know that I'm not sitting here doing this out of the kindness of my heart. I do want to help if I can help, but I'm trying to make money as well. Once I kind of went to that kind of philosophy that I am going to make money on this, and that became a realtor too. So that opened up the door to even more disclosures, just letting everybody know what's going on. So I don't have a problem with that. I guess the thing for me, and I don't really have a problem with anything. The thing for me is just understanding, and this is why I wanted to talk to you today, is understanding today with the way the laws are in the state of Alabama, what's the difference between assigning a contract and doing a double close?
Right.
Is there a difference at all aside from, does it matter that I'm taking title in your eyes when it comes to wholesale?
It matters from the standpoint of the mechanics of the transaction. How we, if you're double closing, there's going to be two sets of closing documents. We're going to have to, when we run title, we're going to have to run you as the wholesaler to make sure you don't have judgments, tax liens, bankruptcies, that sort of thing, because you're taking title to the property and then reselling the property to somebody else. So there's that difference on the kind of logistics side of getting a transaction closed. There are two closing statements in a wholesale transaction. Whereas an assignment transaction, you do have one closing statement. The seller is on the closing statement. The end buyer is on the closing statement. And the wholesaler is on there receiving an assignment fee. And wholesaler doesn't really, is not taking title in the assignment scenario. So very few, if any, documents for the wholesaler to sign at closing. It's strictly at that point a transaction between the seller and the buyer. So, yeah.
Why would I do one and not the other? What are the benefits and maybe drawbacks of the two?
Well, one is less expensive. It is less
assignment.
expensive to do the assignment because you're not having to have a second closing. And a lot of people have said, well, have raised questions about that in the past as far as why am I having to pay two sets of closing costs? Well, from our standpoint, it is two transactions, and the work to get the two sets of documents together is basically the same.
And there's two sets of title insurance, right?
Well, sometimes there is title insurance on the first transaction, sometimes not.
Right.
It kind of depends on if the parties want it on the first transaction, but certainly the title has to be updated for the end transaction. So there's that. As far as, I think most folks, it's just a personal preference, on the as to whether they want to do a double close, want to do an assignment. Some wholesalers are still very sensitive to either the buyer or the seller really knowing what they're making on the transaction.
And that can be hidden with a double close to an extent.
Well, it's you would have to have both closing statements to see what the bottom line is on both. To see what the net is.
And there's no way for a beginning seller or an end buyer to have both sets.
No. I mean, typically the only person that gets copies of the settlement statements are the ones who are signing the settlement statements.
Right.
The respective settlement statements.
So the only way a seller and an end buyer, like if on a double close, the only way they would know maybe what the wholesaler is making is to just look at a public record, I suppose.
Yes, it'll be on the deed. Of course, the deed's going to show what you paid for it as the wholesaler and what you sold it for as the wholesaler.
On the deed, but the seller is not getting a copy of the deed. They can go find a copy of the deed.
Yeah, they could certainly go to the courthouse and get a copy of the deed.
So you just have to really want to know, in other words.
Yes. I mean, it's public record,
Yes.
but it's not like,
Correct.
Yeah, you would have to take the step of investigating that. Yeah.
So I assigned really early when I first started doing wholesale transactions, but really probably since 2014, I don't know that I've assigned anything. I think I've double closed for a pretty long time now.
Yeah.
And I do it for that reason. I don't know that it would matter most of the time, but I do want to kind of respect that privacy to an extent. I understand they can go look it up if they want to, where nobody kind of knows what's going on as far as like the money goes. But I also do it because I was taught that assigning is a little bit more, that's where kind of like the law kind of comes into play, where assigning something where they could make a law against, hey, you can't assign, which they've done in states. You cannot assign contracts.
Correct.
And they haven't gotten that far in our state yet. But, and then just from I want to make sure I'm wholesaling this property, like the true sense of the word. I'm going to buy it. And I'm going to use, and I want to ask you about this, I'm going to use the end buyer's funds.
Well, that's what I want to come to, because that is what drastically changed when the wholesaling law went into place.
That's what I'm asking
Most of the time, you're not going to find a closing attorney or a title company that's going to let you use the end buyer funds to pass through to the first transaction. That has stopped. So that's what has prompted a lot of wholesalers to go back to the assignment route, because you're not having to bring money at that point. But on the double transaction, you've got to fund that. Well, I won't say you have to, but most everybody that I know that's operating in this sphere right now, title companies, closing attorneys, and all that, are requiring the first transaction to be closed with the wholesaler's own money or transactional funds that the wholesaler has borrowed. And then the resale transaction, the loan is paid off if it was transactional funding, or the wholesaler is paid back for what they put in the first time.
Right.
And they're making that net between the two.
Why did that? Is that law?
It's not a black and white law, but a lot of title companies and closing attorneys, because that wholesaling, and we're pointing to the wholesaler affidavit that's on the table here, a lot of the title companies, and our office included, has kind of taken the position that it adds another layer of transparency to the transaction when the end buyer's money is not being put at risk until the A to B transaction is closed. So
I want to ask you about this.
Yes.
This is your document.
It's actually a document that was prepared by a title underwriter. It's not my document. Yeah.
Why did they prepare it? Why did they feel it necessary? Did
you ask them?
Oh,
Yeah.
They wanted it.
Correct.
And so, is this something that you feel like is? Well, what is it? First of all, like
Well, as we said at the top of the conversation, it's just a disclosure to the buyer, the seller, and the wholesaler, all on the same page, that everybody is aware that the wholesaler is putting this property under contract to either resell to somebody else immediately or to assign to somebody else.
But does this? It doesn't really discuss using the end buyer's funds.
It does not.
Okay, so that's kind of two different conversations, I guess.
Correct.
Then.
Yeah.
So, but the wholesaler property affidavit, is this a document or is there a like document that you know of that other title companies are using besides yours?
I think most everybody is using a document like this because, as I said, it came from the title underwriters. They put this together. They wanted this to try to make sure that the notice requirement of the Alabama wholesaling law was being followed.
Right.
So they didn't have to worry about somebody coming back down the road with a claim
Gotcha.
that some law had been violated.
Do you think this is a good idea?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. Jeff, I'm super grateful that you allowed me to do this, because there aren't a lot. Well, first of all, you're the leader in our area in closing these transactions. Every single person I know who does these transactions uses you, and that's for a reason. You've been doing it for a very long time. You're incredibly knowledgeable. You study this stuff, and I'm super grateful for you for getting this great information out to the public and out to wholesalers specifically, because there's nowhere else to get the information.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for you taking the time.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep.